Well, we've got Tibor Shanto here. Tibor, great to
Hey,
have you
Tibor.
here as always.
Thank you.
And we're
Good seeing
talking
you.
about, well, I always call you a sales guru, right?
I thought of an answer to that.
Okay.
So you
Ah,
know how we've talked in the past about sales being science, art, this, that. So maybe the guru part's a bit too spiritual. Maybe,
Yeah. Okay. What should we say then? Sales,
sales thought leader,
thought leader.
well,
expert.
the Charlie Sheen, let's call him a sales warlock.
That's right.
Sorry. Yeah.
Torpedo
Charlie
of
Sheen.
sales truth or something like
Yes,
that.
exactly.
But I hope not to
Well,
bomb like he did in Detroit.
well, and here's a guy who's trying to sell a product himself, and
Yeah.
he has torpedoed everyone. Well, I don't know what you guys heard about it. We were talking about it off the air, that his Detroit show, they booed him off stage. And
But
then he retooled it, and the next night they're saying, yeah, it's okay, it's not bad.
So I would say you have to give him credit for retooling and coming back
In
with
a
something
24
bit
hour
different.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what does that say about Charlie Sheen? Is he a genius or just...
Or maybe he's just using something that keeps him going for 24 hours straight. Just a
Red Bull?
Inspiration.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe he's got a space rock of his own.
Yeah, I think he is Space Rock.
We're going to try to get him in here, and then we can ask him.
That
There
would
you
be
go.
great.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Tibor. So anyway, we're looking forward to this discussion today. The last time we were here, we were talking about the different ways you make those connections in
Right.
prospecting,
That's
especially, right? And we're going to explore those a little bit more today.
I think,
Voicemail.
yeah, we left off on voicemail, and you were asking me whether people should be leaving voicemail, and I was saying that they should.
Yeah.
And I think we were going to try and expand on that. So,
And before we do, I mean, that's something I think probably in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of salespeople, because at one time voicemail was new and people didn't really know how to deal with it, or the etiquette wasn't really developed around it yet. And probably salespeople would not have, their first impulse would have been to not bother to leave a voicemail. I'm going to wait till I can connect to the person.
I think at first it was the other way. I think at first, when it was, remember back in the 80s, was supposed to be the replacement for that little pink message slip, and it was a bit of a novelty. And I think what changed is not so much the salespeople, but I think people receiving the voicemail. So at first it was a novelty. Look, I got voicemail, so you would listen to it, you would respond, and so on. As people began to abuse voicemail, not just salespeople, but family members and others and so on, people are now using voicemail much more as a triage or as a means of avoiding certain contacts. So I don't think they're being antisocial, but they're trying to really maximize their day and avoid contact. So now I think there's a greater reluctance among salespeople to leave voicemail because they've been conditioned that they're not going to get a call back.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the challenges that salespeople have to overcome because, not to be humorous, but I think the question is if you don't leave a voicemail, they pretty well have to be clairvoyant or Kreskin in order to call you back, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. So for
So-
sure you're not going to get the call back if you
Absolutely.
don't leave a voicemail.
No.
And if you think about it as a triage, as you say, triage
Right.
process for the person going through those voicemails, that no doubt helps inform the salesperson like what kind of a message they're going to deliver because they got to
Right.
break through. They got to be one of the voicemails that they're going to say yes to and make a response.
And I think, yeah, and that's one of the things that people are looking for. And I would suggest that over the last 3-4 years, I've had about 5 or 6 bits on voicemail on my blog. And if you do the tracking, generally those have the highest audience because people are trying to figure it out. I don't think anybody's figured it out as yet. But it's one of those questions that consistently comes up. How do I deal with voicemail? How do I deal with voicemail? How do I get people to call me back and so forth? So I think, as you said, it is an area where salespeople are still trying to come to terms with, and we'll talk about email after that, which just adds another element. But I think voicemail, like anything else in sales, I think people need to step back and ask themselves what they're trying to accomplish. And when they ask themselves what they're trying to accomplish, first and foremost, they need to consider what the target of their voicemail is trying to accomplish. Because it's good for me to have my agenda, but I'm really trying to impose myself on the other person's agenda. If you remember, we talked about cold calling being an interruptive marketing exercise. So I'm really imposing on what that person is, what that person is doing. And I think a lot of salespeople misuse voicemail, not in a negative way, but they use it in the wrong way. They haven't thought about what they're trying to accomplish. And there are certain logical steps that happen in sales. And I think with voicemails, most salespeople try and accomplish an appointment, a sale, or something using the voicemail, which is where they fail. And I think if they just step back and try to rethink about what they're trying to do, which is really to initiate a callback. Once that callback happens, then I can get into the rest of trying to set the appointment or get the
Right,
sale.
Right.
Yeah, you have to look at, I guess, in steps, right?
Right.
You ultimately the goal is to make the sale, but you're not going to do that
Not
by
on the
leaving a
phone.
voicemail,
Right.
right? So you got to think of what is the next step. The next step is getting a call back.
Getting the call back so I can now be interacting one-on-one and do some of the things we've talked on and probably talk about in the future in terms of engaging, overcoming objections, and so on. So if you will, salespeople, 90% of the people we call, I bet you if we picked any office number at random where the person wasn't there, their outbound message would be something to the effect of, please leave a detailed message. And the reason they want a detailed message is they can rationalize why they don't want to call you back.
Right.
You know, I don't need this, so I'm not going to call this individual back. So my suggestion and the technique, and I think we talked about this last time, that I get about half of the voicemails that I leave, I get called back within about 72 hours. Because again, I'm counterintuitive to what the message says. I really, in a sense, try and be as cryptic as possible, but with a few
But
hooks.
concise, right? I mean, you want to be, I want the contact, but I don't want to bore you, scare you, I find a lot of people these days almost want to get voicemail because they think they're doing their due diligence by contacting you without ever having to actually call you or talk to you.
Yeah, it's a check mark.
Yeah, it's just another check off. So what do you suggest? It's like if you're leaving a message, should it be like 30 seconds and under, a minute and under, what you need, phone numbers, etc.?
Yeah, the message that I leave is about 10 seconds long.
Right.
And again, it's a technique that I was taught, and it continues to work. So again, concise probably doesn't describe what I do. Cryptic does. Right. And I use a very simple one. Again, people can go to the blog and read it in detail. But I basically leave them my name and the company name. And again, I think we talked about I rarely leave Renbor Sales Solution because it sounds long and expensive. So I just say Renbor. And then I generally leave my phone number in a very slow, methodical fashion. And then I leave them a third-party reference that I hope will pique their curiosity, and that's the extent of the voicemail. So as an example, if I am trying to prospect Pepsi and I've done legitimately business with Coke, so you can't make it up. You have to be ethical and clean because ultimately you're looking to have an interaction or relationship. But if I've done business with Coke and I'm calling Pepsi, then my message would simply be, it's Tibor Shanto calling you from Renbor. I can be reached at, and then I leave my number. I'm happy to do that, 416-822-7781. And I'm calling with reference to Coke or whatever the other third-party entity is. And the goal, as I say, it's cryptic, is to really get them to be curious enough to say, why is this person calling me about my competition? I'm going to pick up the phone and check this out.
And I think a 50%, as you said, 50% callback rate in 72 hours is pretty awesome.
That's pretty good. That's very good.
And, you can...
Absolutely.
As a salesperson, you can fine-tune that. So, for instance, one of the things I like to do is to leave messages late in the evening, 6:30, 7 o'clock, because I know the person's not going to be there. The goal is for them to get the voicemail first thing the next morning. If it clicks and it creates that curiosity, they'll say, let me call this person right away. So if I know I'm going to be in the office the following morning, I leave the voicemail the night before. And again, that just increases the odds. There's no guarantees, but what you want to do is continuously build your odds of success.
Okay. Anything else we should talk about the email? Or the voicemail before we get into email?
Yeah, stay with it. We've talked before that salespeople are a bit impatient. Most of them will try 1, 2, a small subset will try 3, but really it takes more than 6 or 7 touch points. Think about how busy people are, and we're trying to, again, get in the way of that. So get a methodology going. So my process is I'll call somebody on a Monday. If I don't get a call back by Wednesday, I'm impatient. So if I don't get a call back by Wednesday, I'll call them again in the morning. I'll send them an email in the afternoon. I'll follow up again maybe the following Monday. So have a plan of really touching that individual 6, 7, if you have it in you 8 times over the course of a couple of business weeks, because they have a lot of other things, and what you're trying to do is climb up that to-do list. You have to be persistent, not a bug and not persistent.
Where's the line there between bugging and...
I think calling 2 or 3 times a day and at the end saying, why the hell aren't you calling me back? You've crossed the line.
Yeah.
But I think
Call the police.
if you're professional and I think your message is clean and you don't sound frustrated and you sound very patient. And in fact, I know somebody who's taken the technique and taken it a step further, and on their 3rd or 4th message say that, I understand you're busy and I appreciate that I'm trying to get on your agenda. I'll call you back again. And there's other little twists that you can do to make it more effective. But the thing, to your question, really keep in mind that it's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous effort. So if you're going to call somebody once, if you're going to put somebody in play once, stick with it 5 or 6 times, combine it with email as well, but go for that 5 or 6 touch points. You'll be in that narrow band of people who actually make that extra effort and probably benefit from it.
Is there a point where you say, that's it, I haven't gotten a response, called enough times, I'm going to just drop it?
Yeah, but I want to, so yes, but there's a footnote. I will generally give up after a couple of weeks, 6 or 7 tries, but not because I've given up on the individual, but I need to get prospects in order to get clients out of it. So I will revisit them, 2, 3 months down the road and so forth, because some people, for whatever reason, either they're tied up, they went on vacation and didn't change their outbound mail or what have you. So yes, I will rotate them out, but I don't give up on them, if you know what I mean, if the company fits my profile.
That's great. So persistency obviously is an important trait for all salespeople. Okay, let's get into the email, because
Right.
email is relatively recent, more recent than voicemail.
Email, yep.
Right.
And obviously it's another way to try to reach your prospective clients.
I would say more and more. If you think about the BlackBerry world, just stand at the red
Yeah.
light downstairs and everybody's either on their iPhone or BlackBerry. And I'm as guilty as the next person. On any given day, you probably get a faster reaction from me by sending me an email, because I'm in between things and I can quickly check my phone and respond to it, than if you left me a voicemail. So not only is it new, but I think it's becoming more and more dominant, and more people are open to communicating and initiating contact through email than they were even 3-4 years ago. Having said that, I think, again, same principles apply. Make sure you know what you want out of it. And until the person indicates that they want to continue the communication through email, make sure that the email is getting you what you want, which is a response back and an opportunity to connect. The other is, we live in a very impatient world. So again, if you think about it from a BlackBerry perspective, I talk about being sort of 2 flicks of the thumb. So the first flick, you get to read it. The second flick, they delete you. So if you don't capture their imagination by that second flick, I think you're going to be challenged. So these long Tolstoy type of emails, they're just not going to cut it. Yet
That
they're
is for
still
sure.
out there. So I think what you need to do is consider what the medium is, and I think the rule of thumb should be picture the email as it would present itself, either on a BlackBerry or an iPhone or one of the Androids or what have you. If you can't communicate a concise message in that particular point, then you really have to ask yourself, are you over pushing it? Are you overselling it? So subject line, message, all come into it.
And I guess the same principles apply in that you really don't want to, you're really just trying to get somebody to make a response back to you.
And I think the other thing to remember that's different just due to the technology and email, and this gets down to the tactical, but it matters, is my tendency, and I'm assuming that I'm not that different from others. Some will argue, but I make the assumption I'm not that different. So whenever somebody sends me an email that is directed to me and it's not spam and it's not advertising, but they are trying to communicate with me, I'll always take everything after the @ sign and drop it into a browser just to see what the company is. So think about it. Most of our emails have everything after the @ sign is your web address. So you have to, again, consider that. So your message has to be consistent with what you have on your website and so on. And I think, again, conciseness is the key. So subject line is important. I tend to make sure the subject line does relate to the topic, and really be specific about what it is that you want out of that email, and then mix it up with your voicemails.
Now, it seems to me, I don't know what your experience is, Tibor, but my experience with email is that email is losing its effectiveness as a communications tool. And I don't mean that it is ineffective yet, but I find myself really burdened with email. Like, it's almost like a chore to get through the emails. Yeah, there's business there,
Right.
but you gotta sift through it, and you've really got to. And I think it's taking up more and more of people's time, to the point where people are starting to have to make some decisions about it and how they work with it.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is, the pendulum is coming back. It came out as a productivity tool. I think now it's somewhere in the middle, and if it continues along the current path, I think people will just be overburdened by it. And I think, again, that's why you saw the rise of instant messaging, for instance, within companies, because I can communicate with you. I would argue you're seeing some of the rise in social media. And we talked about social media before, but I read a stat that, I forget whether it was people under 21 or 27, now communicate more through Facebook than they do through email. So they found a way to sidestep this barrage of emails. And that's where, again, I come back to the fact that the most people tend to eliminate emails based on either who it's from, and if they don't recognize who it's from and they need to make a secondary decision, they'll go to the subject line. And there's filters that are out there that will get rid of certain things on subject lines. So I think the subject line is key for the reason that you say it, because if it doesn't capture them, even if they don't delete it, it'll be weekend reading, and as soon as it gets sunny and warm and people do their gardens, it becomes winter reading. So it just never gets read.
Yeah. You know what I don't like, though? I don't know how you feel about it, but when people, their whole message is in their subject line.
Yeah, that.
Because then I open the email and there's nothing there.
My favorite approach, and I'm not saying it works for me, but it's still young in terms of it being tested. But I like to put what I want out of the email right in the subject line. So if I was sending you an email, and my goal was to try and meet with you Thursday afternoon at 3:00, I would put meeting Thursday 3 p.m. and I would put a question mark at the end. I would have a couple of lines describing who and why I'm writing you. Again, very cryptic in nature, as we talked about in the voicemail, and then close it off by saying, so can we meet Thursday 3 p.m. and again with a question mark. So I haven't misled you in the subject line.
No.
But again, from a very tactical, we talked once that there's tricks, techniques, and methodology, so this is definitely on the trick level. If I put in there that meeting 3:00, on Thursday, you'll take a second look because you'll know, do I have a meeting
I don't have a meeting.
planned?
Yeah,
What am I? So you'll read the email. And, again, it's been one of those things where, yes, one or two people have gotten upset and felt that I was, being, I guess, less than honest. But most people have responded, and the conversation's quickly gotten past the subject line. But the subject line is key for people ferreting out which emails they want to read
Well,
and which
also
they
it's
don't.
very specific, right? It's very to the point of what you're trying to achieve. So, in a sense, you're wasting as little time of the person that as you possibly can, almost.
And it goes back to age-old things. Give them a call to action. So,
Absolutely.
and there's no story in the email itself, so it's not like I'm wasting their time. They can make up their minds. And again, if they don't answer, they don't know it, but I do. They'll be getting a phone call anyway. So.
Okay. Well, now that now you mentioned, we've talked about how these are relatively new forms of communication, voicemail, email, but you just mentioned Facebook, and of course there's texting.
Texting.
Now, are these ways
Twitter,
to all this new stuff to try to get through to potential clients?
I think so, but I had my head nearly handed to me about 6 months ago when I made a suggestion. So Twitter, definitely. I've had success prospecting through Twitter. I know other people. It's a question of whether you do it. You can talk about it and people will always tell you why it doesn't work, and then when you ask them for an example, they don't have one. So, but I suggested, I did an article based on something I heard from an executive who said that he's open, because he's on the road and all that, he's open to being prospected through text. And I suggested in a blog post that maybe that's a methodology that salespeople should consider. And again, in the context of just connecting, not trying to sell through text.
Just try to get a text back.
Just trying to get a text back, exactly. And, people of all stripes basically really went after me saying that's not cricket. It's, texting is a private, personal thing. And I would argue Facebook is, but it's not being dominated by businesses. So I think, somebody I know once talked about the various modes of communication, and some people will feel comfortable by phone, some people with text, some people with, email. So I think it's up to us as salespeople to test in a polite and professional way which mode of communication works for you, which may be different than what works for you.
Try it and see if it works. If you get
Yeah.
results, then you're doing something right, I guess.
Well, that's why Facebook has their own email accounts now, and they want you to do your emailing through Facebook. And will Twitter, with their 150, letters, whatever.
140.
140, yeah.
And
that's
I
right.
become creative.
Yeah, yeah, and that's when you really have to become creative if you're sending out, especially using it as a marketing tool rather than a "where are you,"
But I think
GPS tool.
it does get salespeople to really be economical with their words, which is not something that we're known for as a species. Salespeople, we tend to like to talk. So when we're
Right.
limited down to 140 characters, it really does make you choose what the message is.
Right.
So to answer your question, Hugh, I think it's a perfectly plausible formula. I think some people take offense to it because they feel the cell phone, they're paying for the plan and so on. But I would argue most business people, their companies pay for the phone now and so forth. And to me, if you're doing it politely and cleanly, it's a viable mode of communication.
So just another example of these things aren't written in stone necessarily, because there's new stuff coming out,
Right.
new etiquette that needs to be developed, and more opportunities for salespeople to use these tools.
But the other thing that to keep in mind, and again, because you want to stand out from the crowd, is what I also find is that as these new things become more pervasive and so on, there's also the opportunity to revisit some traditional stuff. So what has gone out of fashion, and I think will help you stand out if you're selling these days, is a handwritten note. So if I have success with somebody, I send them a thank you note, handwritten, put it in the envelope. I've shown salespeople that handwritten envelope with a stamp placed on it as opposed to a metered stamp will get past the so-called gatekeeper or personal administrator. So if you take a couple of minutes, and there's services like sendoutcards.com, I see the ad on your desk over there.
Do you work with those guys?
I use it.
Yeah.
It gets, I mean, I'm not part of their multi-level marketing part, but in terms of sending the cards, yeah, regularly. Whenever I finish an engagement, I send out a thank you card. If somebody gives me a referral, I send out a thank you card. And people talk about it. They remember that one little gesture.
Yeah, it's a real personal touch.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about when you finally do, using these techniques, get
Right.
somebody on the phone.
You panic because you weren't expecting
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Yeah. Live person.
That wasn't supposed to happen. I think, again, we've talked about this several times. It's not news. You have to plan what you want. And, again, the goal, you have to decide which type of sale you're in. So if your sale is done face-to-face, then the goal of the telephone is to get that face-to-face appointment and nothing else. If your sale is done more over the phone, A to Z, because, you know, your clients are dispersed or what have you, or due to the cost of sale, then again, you still have to break it down because you're not going to be able to sell to somebody who's not fully engaged with you at the time that you're selling. So once you get them on the phone, I think your first goal and really only goal at the beginning is to get engagement. And whether that translates into a face-to-face meeting or continuing that discussion on the phone right then and there, if you don't cross that initial gap, or to borrow a phrase, you know, the initial chasm, then you're not going to be able to get things going in the right way. So I think where most salespeople need to step back and do some planning is really ask themselves, what do they want out of this call? If I could, you know, choreograph this call to be exactly what I want it to be, what would that be? And then work back from there. So I think that's the one thing. I think, again, we're trying to get on their agenda, so it makes sense that we talk about things that are important to them as opposed to talking about things that are important to us. And still too many salespeople get on the phone and they go, I'm from Acme Corporation, we're a Fortune 500 company, and by this time the prospect's asleep and they're talking to themselves. So I think you really have to make sure that what you do or what you say on the phone is something that's going to align with that individual's agenda as opposed to talking about your marketing speak and so on, which takes work prior to the call of understanding what that person may or may not be dealing with that day. What are some of the trends in the industry? What are some of the trends for the role? What are some of the challenges? So again, we talked about social media, Facebook. That's a really good place to get ideas as to what are some of the talking points that the individual would respond to. And then the other thing to remember, which we touched on, is since we're interrupting them, their first tendency is going to be to try and get off. And again, not because, and we talked about this in terms of rejection, not because they don't want to talk to you, but they have a number of other things going that they want to get back to. So what tends to happen is, even if you get past the first part, it's a question really of how you deal with those rejections. And we talked about that. If you look at it at the end of the day, there's probably only about 5. They come out sounding a whole bunch of different ways, but they'll generally tell you that they're all set. They'll tell you they're not interested. They're busy. They'll ask you to send them some material, or they'll tell you that they had a bad experience, not necessarily with you, but maybe somebody in your industry, somebody in your solar system. They're just carrying around this bad experience. So you have to be prepared for how you take those and leverage those back into a conversation. And I think, again, where most salespeople tend to fail, and we talked about the rejection factor last time, is by not being ready and actually being surprised when the person says, oh, we're all set. Well, most businesses already have processes and things up and going.
Okay, so what you're saying, there's 5 essential rejections or
80%
objections,
of the time,
right?
yes, 5.
So
Master those, you'll be rich.
can we talk about how to handle?
Yeah. So I think, again, first and foremost, and it sounds somewhat basic, but you can never repeat it too much. The objection has little to do with you and more to do with the customer trying to get back to where they're going. So what you have to do is really feed into that and acknowledge what they're saying. So one of the things that a lot of people don't like about telemarketers is they just talk through whatever it is that you're saying. So if you don't acknowledge what the person just said, even if they say something simple, oh, we're all set, we're good, you need to acknowledge that and then show them using something that will give you credibility and involve them why you're not saying that what they have is not good, but there's ways that you can expand on that, you can build it out, you can take it to the next level, and that's where, again, that pre-knowledge of what that position is trying to accomplish, what's important to the company. So with most of those, it's acknowledging what they're saying, so it shows them that you're actually open to a conversation as opposed to a one-way type of dialogue, well, monologue, I guess, if it's one way. And then be ready to present some credible reasons why, despite the fact that they have things in place and you're not trying to get them to swap things out. Because again, one mistake salespeople make is what you have is great, but get rid of that and forget all the money you've invested in it, buy mine. And I think right away, as soon as they have that all or none proposition, customers tend to turn off. And when they're on the phone, turning off generally equates to hanging up, which is fatal for the moment. You can always call them back. So I think, again, what I teach is how do you manage that statement by involving the customer with something that you know is likely to be relevant to them and using that as a means of saying, why don't we get together and we'll show you how that works. So instead of, again, selling on the phone, trying to beat down the objection, use the objection as a means of saying, that's exactly why we need to talk about that particular thing and use that. So if it's a question of not interested, in a very generic way, the reason they wouldn't be interested is they don't immediately see the value or benefits. You have to pivot it to talk about something of value that they could recognize that is something that they would want to discuss. The question of busy, a lot of salespeople make one of two fatal mistakes. They'll either say, when's a good time? And the guy will go, third Tuesday after hell freezes over. Or, they'll say, I just need 5 minutes of your time. And to me, again, if the guy said he's busy, then why are you asking for 5 more minutes of his time? So again, you need to manage that in a way that shows that you understand that they're busy. All you're doing is trying to set an appointment and put the time on the table. And with the send, again, that's one of the tougher ones because I find people who say send me stuff, they don't even have it in them to say no. They just say send me with the hope.
That is them saying no.
Yeah.
I'm getting out of this conversation right now.
Yeah.
Send me something.
So I've stopped sending things. About 4 years ago, this guy told me to send him something. Didn't send him anything, not a thought, nothing. I called him back a week later. I asked him if he got the stuff, and he said yes.
Yeah, I got you.
So I said, all these years I've sent stuff, and people have said they haven't gotten it. The one guy I didn't send stuff to, he somehow seems to have gotten it. So I tend to, again, try and take that away early in the game, or knowing that they did that. Generally speaking, when you call back a week later or whenever it is that you agreed and they say, well, I haven't read it yet or I haven't had a chance to look through it, when I call back, so it's a two-step process, I'll say, Hugh, it's Tibor, following up on the material I sent you. You probably haven't had a chance to read it yet, have you? So I take the opportunity for them to use that line against me, and it sort of puts them in a corner, because if they've read it, then all the reasons we should meet, and if they haven't read it, it opens the door for me to say, that's exactly why I suggested that we get together. I can probably walk you through the salient points quicker than it would take you to read it, and then I put a time on the table. And the bad experience, I generally find you just have to give them a chance to have a catharsis. They generally are not concerned so much with the experience that they had, but whether the experience was resolved or not. So if you look at restaurants, even if they give you more of the same stuff free, it's considered to be resolved, and people will say they had good experiences. Now, how they unfold for each salesperson is going to be a little bit different, and you have to do your pre-work in terms of what is going to get this person to look past the initial objection. But again, it takes practice. But if you're ready for those 5, at least you can manage them when they come. And that doesn't mean that if I manage the first one, it's automatically going to get me to where I want to go. But it gets rid of the knee-jerk or the conditioned reaction, and then the person either has to make a decision that they're going to hang up, or they're going to start a conversation with you, which is the goal.
And it's one of those things, too, where you can have a strategy for handling objections, but there's nothing like experience to get good at really handling them well and being able to get to the next step in the sales process.
And understanding that it's not a game of perfection, So I, based on my training, the way I was trained, I keep track of my activities, and I know that it's going to take me so many dials to talk to so many people to get so many appointments. So again, it's not easy, and I understand rejection is not fun, but it's part of the experience.
Right.
So.
Okay. So is there anything else? I mean, that's a lot today. We got down to, of course, we can't give
nitty-gritty.
all the details because people can get more information by checking out your blog and
Now the website.
the website.
Yeah, and they can do that at sellbetter, SELLBETTER.ca. And once they've looked at that, they can put /blog and get to the blog. Or if they really are in a hurry to talk to me, you can just pick up the phone and call 416-822-7781.
Okay.
Terrific.
Great, Tibor. Thanks again for coming in.
Thank you.
Look
My
forward to
pleasure.
the next one. I'm
Likewise.
not sure what we're going to talk about next time, but
I'll come up with something.
I've got a couple things already. So we will look forward to that.
Thank
Tibor
you.
Shanto, thank you.
Have a great week.
You too.
Thanks, Stuart.
Hey, that's the first time we did it on a Monday, right? It's usually Friday, right?
Yes,
So it's
yes.
a totally different mindset.
Starting the week.
Exactly. So let's take a quick break. We're going to come back with David Garrett, personal life coach, right after this as Liquid Lunch continues.